All right, let's go ahead and get started. How is everybody doing this morning, this afternoon? Doing pretty well, yeah? Didn't quite make it out for those shots at the grass bar, so I'm sad about that. But I'm excited to be here with you all today. Hopefully you're here because you want to learn how to hack your work-life blank balance, and that's what we're going to be talking about. A little bit about myself. My name is Jennifer Wadella. I am a software engineer. You can follow me at OMG It's Fetty on Twitter. I do like to warn people at every talk that if you are going to follow me on Twitter, you do need to be aware that I live tweet Monday nights trashy reality TV shows in America, like The Bachelor or RuPaul's Drag Race, and it's just my thing. So be aware of that in my Twitter feed. I'm a 9-to-5 software engineer, which is kind of what I joke about. It's not always a 9-to-5 job, but JavaScript developer working at a small local tech company where I live in the legal tech space. Writing JavaScript, Angular 2, that's what makes me happy. I'm actually a nonprofit founder and director. So 5 years ago, I launched an organization called Kansas City Women in Technology. And then the goal of that organization is to grow the number of women in technology careers in Kansas City. And so that's basically like another full-time job. I'm also clearly an international speaker, so I spend a lot of time traveling, giving conference talks. Come on in. We're going to have a fun time today. International speaker, and I'm a mentor, so I do try and make sure that I'm always paying everything forward. Come on in, guys. You're fine. I see like people coming through the back. I do like to make sure that I'm taking time out of my life to mentor and pay it forward and make sure to build up and develop talent in those around me and those who want it. And I do like to warn people that sometimes I say bad words, and sometimes I say things with a lot of passion. So if that makes you uncomfortable, probably not the right talk for you. This is where I'm from, in the United States. It's a special little place called Kansas City in the middle of the map where a lot of people fly over us because nobody's realized how cool we are yet. They just think we're barbecue, but we're so much more than that. So really love my hometown of Kansas City. If you're ever in the States, we do have a conference there called Kansas City Developer Conference happening in July. Really great hometown conf. It's got like a big conference feel, but small town speakers, so it's a lot of fun. Okay, so who feels like this on a daily basis? Yeah, right? Because we have so much going on, especially in the technology world, of everything we're supposed to be doing and learning, that it's just like this never-ending struggle where you feel like you're falling down the stairs, and that's not what we want, right? That's not how you take over the world. We want to be more like this. Okay, so let's talk about this concept of what I have called work-life blank balance. And obviously, you start with your work, which is what's gonna provide your paycheck, what you need to be doing to making sure you're supporting yourself and your family. You've got your life, which includes your family and your hobbies and everything that you're doing in your downtime. And then we have this idea of this blank, and this is your passion area. The cool thing about software is a lot of times our passion coincides with our work, and so those pair really nicely together. But a lot of times we aren't fortunate enough to have the kind of job that's going to allow us to work on exactly what our passion area is. And so that's this third element we have to add to our life to really be successful. And so it becomes a struggle, and I think a lot of us have enough of a hard time just managing our work-life balance. But what if you have that extra thing, that thing that drives you, that thing that really excites you? How do you fit that in, and how do you continue to excel and grow in that area? And so that's the basis of this talk. This really came out of this idea with my nonprofit, where I really harp my team on what I call work-life volunteer balance, volunteer being the blank area, and how to keep all those things in tandem, because burnout isn't good for anybody. And if you're not keeping everything in balance and burning yourself out, you're never going to do what you want to do. You're never going to help make the world a better place, because you're going to be in this constant state of just burning out and miserable and crying yourself to sleep at night. And I've been there, and we don't want to be there. Okay, so work. Again, this is what you're going to do to basically collect a paycheck. Hopefully you do like your job enough, because you get to do the kind of code you want to write, and that keeps you happy. But that's the baseline of what we're going to call our work. Our life, everything we do when we're not at work. And our blank, whatever our passion area is. With your work, this is really going to consist of the kind of things you're balancing, like your actual job execution, what it takes to do your job on a daily basis. That might include upgrading your skill set. We're bombarded all the time by new technologies and new frameworks, and we lose our value, and we're not as good as our jobs if we're not constantly keeping up with the technology. And so that's a huge part of our everyday workflow. You might be a team lead, where a huge part of your day is managing others and figuring out how to map out duties and delegate, and that takes a lot of mental and emotional energy to do, in addition to everything else you have going on. And then you've got the generic meetings, responding to emails, training. Maybe your company has a little bit more paperwork, or they have you track items differently. That, again, is something you're having to mentally balance just to execute on your day job. That's a lot of things to be processing on, right? Okay, so what about our life? What are the things that we're constantly kind of juggling? Definitely household management, keeping a roof over our heads, whether you live in a home or an apartment, and everything it takes to make that happen. Making sure your bills are paid, dealing with maintenance, everything like that. Again, a lot of mental energy that's taking up there. Financial planning, making sure that you're going to have a stable future. You can laugh at us in the United States because we are so fucked right now. So a lot of us are definitely thinking, okay, crap, I can't rely on Social Security or anything like that. I really need to be proactive about my financial planning. I'm working at a startup. They don't offer a 401k. Like, how am I supposed to plan for my future? And so, again, building this mental workload of everything we're trying to balance. Having a family, spending time with your family, prioritizing your kids and their activities and everything going on. Again, more of these things that are constantly pulling our focus. Our health, which we don't talk about nearly enough. How do we make sure that we're prioritizing that? Sleep, also important to prioritize, especially when you're at a conference and drinking whiskey a little later in the evening than you should be. Social life, which, again, we probably don't give enough importance to, making sure that we're prioritizing spending time and building relationships outside of the humdrum of everything else. Spending time for hobbies. And relaxation, which, again, I feel like we do not give enough credit to, especially in this industry where we're always feeling this constant pressure to go, 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 and be the best, and be the best, and be better, and always be learning. We really devalue how much relaxation helps. And so that's everything. That's like our normal baseline, right? And there might be more things depending on your personal life situation. But what is your blank? Does that include volunteering? Maybe you're blogging, you're trying to become like a thought leader or a content generator. Are you interested in public speaking? Do you constantly feel pressure trying to find the time to write new talks and submit abstracts and then make improvements and kind of see your feedback and take that into account? Do you have a side hustle? Is there some really awesome project that you're working on that you can't quite fit in with your work, and so you're having to find those time outside of work hours, outside of life hours to execute on this? Are you managing a nonprofit on the side like I do? I actually have 39 people on my team that I'm managing. So that's a big deal of what I do. And why a lot of this talk is going to be built around managing people and finding a way to balance that while keeping your sanity. Maybe you're into a competitive sport, and that's going to take a lot of time and energy and something that you might be practicing or getting coaching in, having to prioritize that in your schedule as well. Maybe you're looking to do more open source contribution. You've got your own project and you're trying to get people involved and work on that. All these things take such a massive amount of energy, and it's almost, again, like a second full-time job. So how do we begin to balance all these things? This looks a little weird on my screen, but this is a scatter plot of some random things in my life. Sorry, that resolution is a little goofy. Let me see if I can fix that for you guys. Meh. Okay, well, we're losing like the bottom half of my chart. But this is kind of interesting. On the y-axis, we have our sense of urgency. And so you can see the different areas I've plotted. The more urgent ones are towards the top of the map, and then the more important ones are going to be towards the 0 on the x-axis. And you can see I've got them all flagged with what's my work, what's my life, what's my blank. And you'll notice the different sizes of the circles are how I'm determining effort. So this is kind of how I'm looking at my life and saying, okay, these are all the things. This is the amount of energy it takes me to execute on these. And let's use this as our baseline, right? This is my normal, unoptimized work life. Okay, so let's talk about some strategies for how we keep things in balance and how we keep things in balance when stuff gets a little crazy, because the world is not a perfect place. Our lives are not a perfect place, and there's a certain level of chaos to expect there. And so we're going to talk about prioritizing, automating, balancing, finding tools and processes, and recompensating. And a lot of these should be pretty inherent to you if you are a developer, because hopefully in your code, you're constantly looking for ways to optimize that code. So why would we not apply that same concept and optimize our lives? Okay, so let's talk about prioritizing. Has anybody heard of the Eisenhower chart for determining priority? It's kind of hard to see hands, so all right, thank you. I've got it. verbal confirmation here. But it's this idea of having two kinds of problems, urgent and important, and nothing else matters. And so when we're looking at everything I listed out earlier, your kind of like constant churn of everything that you're focusing on and thinking about in your life that you're trying to keep all in balance, right? We can start to break down and figure out what we really need to focus on, because I'm sure everybody has felt that, where they have a million things on their list, and it puts you into this panic, right, where you can't quite figure out where to get started, and you just cycle and cycle and cycle. And so this is one of the tools we can use to get out of that cycle. And so this is what this looks like. We've kind of got these couple different quadrants here. And so the top right is, top left is going to be our urgent and important quadrant. So this is the stuff that absolutely needs to get done right now. And this is going to be, your pressing problems, your things that come up that need your time and energy immediately to solve. This might be crises. This might be some sort of deadline-driven project, something like that. It might be a home emergency where you've got a pipe that has burst, and all of a sudden you have to deal with that. Then we move over a quadrant to the right. I'm kind of like backwards today. And this is not urgent, but it is very important. And so these are the kind of things that we're going to focus on doing our skill development. When we talk about needing to update our skill sets, like going to a conference like this would definitely fall in that category where it's not urgent, but it's important and so crucial to be improving our skill sets and our understanding of what we do. This is really good for your planning and your preparation. So when you start to structure your week or your month, or kind of looking at what's going on in your workflow, almost your personal sprint planning. Is going to fall in this quadrant of, again, not urgent, but very, very important, and so you should be prioritizing all the time. We get lower when we get into the urgent but not important, and these are going to be things like your Slack notifications that are always going off. These are going to be your emails, your phone calls, your interruptions, and things that are immediately going to pull your attention and pull your focus, which we all know how devastating that can be, especially if you're in the middle of writing code, and they might not necessarily be very important. And so we need to kind of learn to understand these different things coming into our lives and being able to prioritize, okay, do I really need to respond to this email right now? Or can I put some sort of system in place where I can pause that email until I can spend the quality time that I need to get back to it? And that way you can kind of keep whatever your focus is in balance. And then finally, we have the quadrant of waste. And I'm going to tear this apart in a couple slides, but in here we're putting things like TV and social media and Reddit. And so the idea is we don't need to do any of these things. They're not important and they're not urgent, so throw it away. But I say fuck that because we need a little balance in our lives. Okay, another thing that comes to prioritizing, when it comes to prioritizing, that helps me a lot is eating the frog first. So weird phrase, right? But it's actually based on a quote by Mark Twain. But the idea is, if you eat a live frog in the first thing in the morning, there's nothing possibly worse you could have happen or you could do that day. So do the thing you're dreading most in the morning, and then the rest of your day is going to be that much better because you don't have to do anything worse than that. So when I look at my life, email is the bane of my existence. Like, my inbox is at a terrifying state right now, just being out of the country for 2 days. And so it's the thing that draws the most mental and emotional energy from me to handle. And so my thing is, when I'm going to be most productive, the first thing in the morning is I'm going to eat my frog, which is answering my emails. And so that's one of the very small tricks I use to kind of keep my life in balance, is by taking that huge thing that just drains the life out of me, spend my time handling that in the morning, and then I can be so productive the rest of the day. I can be like a happy little code monkey and get all the coding done because I've already handled all my emails. And then if an email comes in during that duration, well, that gets snoozed until I'm ready to deal with it, which will probably be the next morning. And so it's a really great way to eliminate this idea of really pressing distractions, but also set yourself up for success by doing that big chunk in the morning. So if you're kind of hearing this process and you're like, well, what about my creative stuff? Like, creative is inspirational, right? It's a very different thing that we can't always optimize and process and plan around. What do I do when I'm in the middle of being productive, but I have that idea? I have this brilliant idea for my open source project, or I've been struggling with this problem at work, and it would be like a really good blog content piece. Like, what do I do with that? I can't just drop what I'm doing to get to that. And so we need to figure out kind of different tools and processes that we can use as a creative placeholder. shoulder. And so it's really important to kind of understand yourself and what works best for you. And so if you're running into a situation like this, your first thought should be, okay, how do I begin to optimize this process? What is the best way for myself to take this thought, this brilliant idea that I've had, and make sure that I can preserve it until I can give it the full time it deserves? So a big thing for me is Trello. I kind of have this insane Trello board where, especially when I have a new talk that I'm working on, and I'll have this thought, and it might be in the shower, it might be in the middle of my workday, it might be on a phone call, where I'm like, shit, that needs to go in my talk. And so I have my Trello board that already has my talk ticket that I just dump stuff in. And then when I have the spare time to, like, I know I'm going to have my focus time, I can go back, I can pull that, whatever that thought was from my board, and then go and incorporate that. That's what works for me. A big part of this talk is understanding yourself and figuring out what's going to work for you and building your processes and optimizing for what works for your flow. Another thing that is going to kind of be interesting when we're trying to figure out a better way to prioritize is Murphy's Law. Is anybody familiar with Murphy's Law? This GIF pretty much explains it all. Murphy's Law is what can go wrong will go wrong. And this so applies to your life, especially when you're doing a really good job planning, you got everything optimized and efficient. That is when the universe is going to be like, hey, bitch, you're getting a little too confident. I'm going to throw you a curveball. And all of a sudden, you're dealing with this massive crisis that blows everything out of proportion. And so I think it's incredibly unrealistic to think that we can sit here and plan our lives and optimize and do all this processing perfectly, because shit like this is going to happen. You're going to be twerking up against a door, and then you're going to fall over and catch on fire. And I think if we approach our lives in the way we're structuring and balancing things with this idea of nothing will ever be perfect, shit is going to happen. But if I'm mentally prepared to say, okay, this went down, I can handle it, instead of getting all freaked out that my timeline has been pushed or my flight's been delayed and it's going to screw up my entire life. If we can just kind of go with the flow and realize that this is going to happen, it's going to set you up to be in a better mental state to handle this situation. Okay, so back to my scatter plot of my work life. This is what's happening when, let's say, I have a home catastrophe, like a pipe burst, and my basement is all of a sudden flooding, right? All of a sudden, I have this huge thing that is shifting up on my priority list, very urgent, very important, and everything is really taking a back step. And so I really like the visualization of this, because I think we need to understand the impact everything else has in our lives when something like this happens. We don't have this infinite amount of time and energy, and we need to be aware of that. And when something big happens, we need to scale back on the energy other places. And so this is why when we begin to optimize our lives and work on our work-life blank balance, that we can more easily handle catastrophes, because we have streamlined everything else so well that when a catastrophe happens, we're in a much better place to deal with it. So let's talk about strategy number 2, which is automation, like DevOps IRL. The first one I love is autopay, and the whole idea with automation is taking every small little detail like that's floating around in our brains, right, and getting rid of it to the point that we don't have to think about it anymore, because that's going to give us that much more energy freed up to deal with the things we really care about. And so one of the most important things we need to do to sustain our lives is make sure that we're paying our damn bills on time. And so the more you can automate the processes where you don't have to think about it, you've got an auto withdrawal set up or something like that, whether it's your mortgage or your rent or your electricity bill, whatever that might be, auto-paying is just like a huge relief that you can set up so you don't have to think about that. That is just one less thing to be on your radar to worry about. Auto-communicate, and this is the part of the presentation where I start making up my own words because they sound cooler. So like I mentioned, the big part of my day is answering emails and sifting through that, and that just takes so much energy for me. So a lot of what you can do is start to automate these different tools by creating templates for yourself where you can easily send out responses. So I'm using these as an example because email is like my worst thing that I need to focus on. But I have a lot of set up responses. So for my nonprofit, we have an interview process where somebody will say, hey, I want to join your nonprofit. And we actually run a little bit like a lean startup. We don't do this like committee model because fuck that shit, it doesn't work. So what we're going to do is we're going to have somebody reach out and say, hey, I want to apply. This is the role I want to apply for. So I have this autoresponder that's going to say, hey, great, we're so excited that you're willing to work with us. Here's our interview process. Here's a link to my calendar so you can schedule an appointment. And so that takes me literally like 3 seconds to deal with. And I don't have to think about it, which is the best part, because I've got a canned response set up. It even populates their name, and I'll talk about the tools I use in a minute. But that is just one less thing I have to deal with. And so they go and they schedule the next thing on the calendar, and then I've got another email that automates after we do our first interview, and it's like, hey, was great to get to know you. Really enjoyed our conversation. Our next step is a culture fit interview with somebody else on our team. Here's a link to their calendar. You can go schedule your meeting. And so it really streamlines the amount of work I'm doing in this massive time-taking up process in my life. So, auto-communicate, creating canned responses. If spelling, grammar, not your forte, and you don't want to look unprofessional, there are a whole ton of tools that you can use. Instead of having to take the time to send something to a coworker and be like, hey, will you proofread this? Make sure I don't look like an idiot. You can actually start to use different tools, browser extensions that are going to help this workflow, and you can just integrate it into part of your process. And again, that's one less thing you have to worry about. I don't know if you know this, but you can set reminders on Slack notifications. And Slack is probably the worst thing in my communication tool set right now, because if somebody pings me on Slack, like my brain automatically goes into like manager process mode. I'm like, oh my God, I have to figure this out right now, which causes me to pull focus from whatever I'm working on. And so I actually found out that you can snooze Slack notifications the same way you can snooze emails. So you can actually go into Slack and say, okay, remind me about this and boom, I can set it for a time that I will know I have the focus for. You can also create to-dos for yourself and your team in Slack. I'm referencing Slack a lot because I feel like our industry has very much moved to this as a primary communication tool, and I think it's brilliant as much as it is awful for pulling our attention. But there are a bunch of ways that you can streamline it and do, get it to do more of the things that you need to do that are going to take less of your brain power and put more of it on Slack. For everything else, you may have heard of If This and That, which has a bunch of different recipes for you to set up and automate your life, whatever kind of interaction that is, especially if maybe you've got a side hustle where you're working on a side business and needing to set up some biz dev work or something like that. A lot of these tools can help you automate that. Auto-market yourself. And this really comes into play if you're somebody who's looking to be some sort of thought leader or content generator or something like that. It's enough work to be generating that content that you're working on. So why don't you set up some tools to actually manage and promote your content? There are a ton of different ones. Hootsuite is the one I use primarily for social media automation, but these are things that you can set up with recipes that you write a new blog. Okay, let's go ahead and schedule a couple tweets about that and automate that, and so you're no longer having to worry about promoting your stuff because you've already built a process and automation around it. You can actually set up Google alerts for your name and your company. So if you're going after press or something like that, you can have this really nice feature that as soon as something comes out, it'll notify you, and then you can put that into your marketing workflow. So find all these different tools and tricks that you can use to really take that marketing piece off your plate and automate as much of it as you can. Auto-domesticate. This is talking about managing your household, and I highly recommend, if you can afford it, and hopefully a lot of you can because you're getting paid well in the technology industry, to look into cleaning services for your house. The amount of time I would spend cleaning my home and losing hours of productivity versus me paying somebody to come in and clean my house and do it, and probably half the time it would take me, because like I'll start cleaning something and I'll be like, oh, well, I'd rather do this instead, and then it takes me like an entire weekend to clean my kitchen. Have somebody do this for you. That's not time you should be spending doing because you have so many better things to focus on. So if you can look into some sort of process that's going to take that piece off your plate, that can be huge. Similar to that, if you have a house, lawn care projects. I will say I don't want anything to do with my front yard. I don't want to mow the lawn. I don't want to do anything. I don't want to have to worry about it. So I outsource that work, and I have a lawn company that comes and they mow the lawn and they fertilize it and, I don't know, do whatever shit you're supposed to do to grass that I don't really care to spend time on knowing. But that's just one less thing I have to worry about in my life. Clean as you go. There are a lot of books about, art of Zen in your household and cleaning, but for me personally, I am that person that a clean environment is going to make me more productive, and I know that about myself. And so one of the things I can do is clean as I go, and that means actually putting my dishes in the dishwasher after I use them, and things like that kind of prevent everything from piling up on me. If you're a messy person and you live for mess, then don't change a thing. If that's your creative workflow, that works for you. But if you're a person that you're like a little sim, and you can definitely tell like when your house is clean, your light is all green, you're a happy little sim, do prioritize figuring out how to manage your household better there. I would definitely recommend trying a meal prep service, especially if you are not a huge cook yourself, or that's something that you just don't want to be bothered with. These are a couple. Blue Apron and HelloFresh are really popular. Marley Spoon is definitely available in the UK. They've partnered with Martha Stewart. And if you've never used a meal prep service kit before, they are amazing. They just have all the ingredients laid out for you. The instructions are so clear and concise, and you're normally done in under 30 minutes. And so if getting a meal on the table for yourself or your family, something that's healthy and nutritious, is really a big struggle for you, absolutely look into a meal prep service. This is just another great automation tool where we can outsource, things that would normally take up our mental energy to somebody else. Menu planning, that is so hard. What do I want to cook this week? Well, they're just going to ship you a box, and you can choose your recipes within that, but the great thing is, okay, you've already got your week planned out. That's one less decision you have to worry about making. Another thing, get the monotonous items, the items you know you're going to need all the time delivered to you, including toilet paper, paper towels. I'm a really big fan of getting my pet food delivered because I have this 90-pound dog, and he obviously eats like a 90-pound dog, and so I have to go and get these huge bags of dog food. And then I discovered Chewy.com, which ships it to me, and that's one less thing. So it might be like 6:15 on a Wednesday night, and I'm still working, and I'm really in focus mode, and then my cat starts screaming at me, and I'm like, oh shit, time to feed the pets. And then I go to the pet room, and oh shit, I'm out of cat food, I'm out of dog food. And so again, that's pulling my focus, which it doesn't necessarily need to do because I can automate this process. So let's look at my scatter plot again. And here's life after automating. This is a little harder to see. So you can see the pink dots, which are my life, but the amount of effort in each of those dots is reducing immensely. So let's look at this at a different view. So this is just like a basic bar graph of the amount of time I'm spending, and this is before automation, and this is after automation. So look at all that time I have gained to pursue everything else I want to focus on just by doing these couple small things by automating my life. Because that's what we want to do, right? We want to give ourselves more time to pursue our work and our blank and the things we really care about. Because buying toilet paper, no, I don't need to be focusing on that. That's silly. I need to be spending my mental energy elsewhere. Spend your time and energy implementing ideas and solving the big problems. You really need to look at your life and find all the redundancies, all the things that are pulling your mental energy, and get rid of those as much as you can, because that's such a waste of your time. You are such a brilliant human being that you should be working on the big, great ideas and not being like, oh, shit, we're out of toilet paper again. Got to go solve that problem now. All right. So kind of talked about prioritizing and automating, but a big part of this is just finding balance within everything we have going on all the time. And the big one here is getting enough sleep, and I cannot stress this enough. So many studies have been done talking about the importance of sleep. This is actually when your body recovers. And I know there's some fancy words up here, but I can tell you a story, and that was me when I was in school thinking I didn't need any sleep at all, and I was playing Halo until probably like 3 o'clock in the morning every night, and then getting up at 6 a.m. for marching band. And I got strep throat, and that turned into mono, and I had mono through all my end-of-year senior AP tests and through the prom. Sleep is important, guys. It will screw you up if you are not prioritizing it, and especially as we get older and start to need more. Most adults actually need at least 7 to 8 hours of sleep. I'm going to argue that women actually need at least an hour more, but we really do not prioritize sleep as much as we should. Sleep actually is really going to aid you in hunger management as well. Your metabolism is going to chill out a little bit while you're sleeping and kind of eat those calories, and so if you're skipping out on sleep, it's really going to screw up the way your body wants to process food. This is also going to improve your memory. And so we've got a couple different sleep cycles that are going on, but the REM and the slow wave sleep are actually what's responsible for making those memory connections and really getting your brain in a good place. So you're really depriving yourself of a lot of mental power if you're not prioritizing sleep. The hard part about sleep is actually getting it, though. Like, how do you get your brain to calm down? And this is something I struggle with, especially when I travel. It's rough. So I've got a couple tools. A lot of people have fitness trackers now, and a lot of them come with sleep functions. And this can be really important for you to pay attention to and kind of figure out what's going on with your body and what you need to work on. But definitely avoid stimulants and light before bed. And we're such a dependent community on our computers and doing everything like that. But there's nothing worse that you can do is be working on a problem or doing something on your laptop or your TV right before you go to bed, because you've got that bright light that you're adjusting from, but your brain is also probably running 1,000,000 miles an hour. And I don't know if you guys do that thing where you're really stressed out about a code problem, and you just like, you dream about it, and you never figure out the solution, and it's really, really frustrating, but your brain just churns and churns and churns all night, and you really don't get restful sleep. And we want restful sleep to get all the great benefits of sleep. So really need to work on figuring out better ways to get our bodies into the right sleep mode. A huge help for me that I've kind of recommended to a lot of the people on my team who also struggle, especially when they're processing all these different problems, right, are finding ways to force your body into sleep. I'm a really big fan of audiobooks, especially an audiobook that I've heard a million times before. Which I don't care how old I am, is Harry Potter right now. And so I put on my Harry Potter audiobook, and the words are good to focus on because it'll get my mind off whatever I'm thinking about, whatever I'm turning on, right? And I'm focusing on the words. But because I've heard it a million times, I know exactly what's going to happen. Like, there's no surprises. Snape kills Dumbledore, sorry. But, you know, it's just a really good way that I've trained my brain. And so if you can start to figure out what works for you to train your brain to get into that sleep mode, that can be really helpful. So no matter what's going on, and if you do have some sort of crazy code problem or chaos in your life, finding a way to get your brain off it and to settle down is really good. White noise creators are great. Music can be really, really good. I'm really into the Batman soundtrack for sleeping as well, especially from Batman Begins. That was just really good soundtrack, so that's helped me a lot. So true. I actually am the most productive in the morning, but do not talk to me before I've had a cup of coffee or I will kill you. My husband likes to test this a lot. Knowing your productive hours is key. And I talk about myself because I am most effective in the morning, and I know that about myself. But I know there are plenty of people that are night owls, and that's when they're going to be most productive. And so the real big deal about hacking a work-life blank balance is it's not the number of hours in a day there are, because everybody has 24, right? Like, we're all operating on the same baseline there. What really matters is how many of those hours we can be productive during. And so we need to understand ourselves and our bodies and figure out when we're going to be the most productive to get our most important work done with all those decisions made. And so if you can figure out what works for you, definitely stack your day to put those hard tasks and the things that you really need to work on in the hours that you're going to be most productive. This is the part where I harp about fitness. And I feel like we're slowly getting better towards it as a society, and it's a lot worse in America because obesity is just like out of control there. But when you really think about it, if you're working for just an hour of your day, that's 4%, which seems minuscule. Like, why on earth would I not spend 4% of my day doing something that's going to make my body better? And it's really interesting, just the amazing health effects just by working out. Like, you could hop on the treadmill for an hour. Like, I love treadmill because that's the time that I do my audiobooks that are for, like, more business improvement. I'm a really big fan of Radical Candor. Did that one on the treadmill. Thanks for the feedback. Another favorite, one of my business-related books. But that's really great for my treadmill time, and it's also really good for solving abstract coding problems in my head, because you're away from the computer, you're away from the screen, you're away from that desire to just type, 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 right? And you can really think through and get really thoughtful solutions. This is also really good if you live in America and you watch a certain orange figure on the TV and then you want to go like rage lift some weights after, because that's what gets me through my workout. But just amazing benefits that we really, really overlook. We do need to be prioritizing our health because it ties so much into how our brains function. And it's crazy to think that our brains are just good enough and not connected to our body, and that it doesn't matter what we do or what we put in our body, like as we chug our Mountain Dews and eat our Doritos. That's not going to be very sustainable for very long. Interesting chart here about what a brain looks like versus sitting quietly, which isn't the worst thing in the world, but just after 20 minutes of walking. So there are a lot of things that you might not realize come into play with your health and the way it affects your thinking. So definitely start to look at your life, and if maybe you've been on the edge of that gym membership trying to figure it out, go for it, try it. Like, be consistent for 3 months. That's about how long it'll take to set in a habit or something like that. But start, let's see, when I started going to the gym, I went 2 days a week. I went on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And then it was like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then I worked all the way up to 5 days a week, and now I can like never dream of not going back. I would love to work out on weekends, but I know my blank part of my life is way too hectic, and so I just say, okay, what's gonna work for me in my lifestyle is Monday through Friday, I can have my really consistent schedule where it's 2 p.m., I'm going to the gym, don't mess with me, like everybody at my work knows this is Jennifer's gym time, like she's not gonna show up for a meeting, do not schedule a meeting during that time, because that is my gym time. Another big thing about balance is learning to say no. I mentioned in my blank area early competitive sports. This is a dance called West Coast Swing. These are two of the top professionals in the world. And I love West Coast Swing. I love it so much. It is so much fun to dance. It's so creative. There are actually a ton of developers that do West Coast Swing, which is really interesting when I used to travel around the company to competitions. But I started dancing West Coast Swing right around the time that I launched my nonprofit. And I could not do both. And as much as I loved West Coast Swing, I loved my nonprofit and what it was doing for my community more. And so I said no to West Coast Swing because there was no way I could fit that all in my life. Someday, maybe, I'll be able to go back to it. But learning to say no, whether it's something you hate or don't want to do or something you love, is really important because there are times that you just cannot do it all. And it's okay. And it's okay to say no, and it's important to say no. Along those lines, I don't think we realize how much toxic relationships really drain us of that mental and emotional energy we need to be productive and to be taking over the world. And I feel like this plagues men a little bit more, just the way you're socialized and brought up, that you have your childhood friends and those are the only friends you ever have, and it can be harder to make friends as an adult man because the way society is, we don't encourage that in men, and it's very encouraged in women. I joke about this with my husband all the time. I'm like, you need to make more friends, because what if I get hit by a bus and die? Like, you're going to be so damn lonely. And he's like, yeah, you're right. And I'm like, but I feel like that creates this fear of thinking we can't remove people from our lives. And especially when it comes to family, they can be really draining. And fortunately, like, my parents are phenomenal. But my mother has a sister who says some really awful, horrible things to her, like absolutely verbally abusive. And it sucks the life out of my mother. And like, when one of those text messages comes through, she's not productive that day, that week. And so if you have these people that are being such a negative energy, such a life suck on you, they don't need to be a part of your life, because they're just going to prevent you from succeeding and excelling. And you want to surround yourself with people who are amazing and who are going to build you up and going to help you take over the world, because those are the kind of relationships we really need in our life. And I do love this quote, and this is an excellent avoiding guilt quote, and that is, do not set yourself on fire to keep somebody else warm. It's not what we want. That's what leads to burnout, and people who are burnt out like that are never going to be productive. Turn off push notifications. And this is something I harp on, especially if you're not at work. Get off Slack. Don't have push notifications on your email. Do not be paying attention to your phone, because you're never going to be able to fully relax and balance if you're constantly watching and seeing these push notifications. And oh my God, there's a problem on production only I can solve. Unless like something is on fire or somebody's going to die, try and take a step back. Set some boundaries for yourself. And a huge part of that is turning on push notifications. Because if you're not seeing what's happening or those messages, it's not going to pull your focus. And you can spend time with the people you love or working on whatever your blank area is without getting sucked into whatever's happening for your push notifications. So I love social media. Twitter is great, especially for coordinating like at conferences and meeting up with friends and everything like that. But it has this really dangerous element to it. And that's the fact that we can follow people who are thought leaders and who are our role models and our idols. But if we're not careful, we can spend so much time beating the crap out of ourselves because we're not as good as that person, or we're not doing everything we're doing, or we're not speaking at as many conferences, or we're not writing as many blogs, or we don't have as many GitHub contributions that are available publicly. And this can be really dangerous, because if you're spending so much time following these people on social media and beating yourself up for not being exactly like them, you're depriving the world of the uniqueness you have to offer. And if you're constantly pressuring yourself or trying to be like somebody else, you're never gonna realize those unique things that you have to offer. And so sometimes it can be healthy to kind of take a step off social media just for a little while. It doesn't have to be forever, but focus on you. Focus the amazingness that you bring and not what everybody else is doing. This is especially bad on Instagram, right, where everybody's just so like photo perfect and they've got the filters and you're like, why don't I look like that? It's not healthy. It's not something that we need to be focusing on or spending our time on. We need to be focusing on bringing our own awesome to the world. I feel like in your blank area of your life, it can be really interesting to deal with criticism. Because let's say you're doing something, and I'm going to use public speaking as an example, that you're going to want to be doing better at, right? And sometimes that'll mean getting reviews on your talk, and somebody's like, this talk was terrible, or I didn't like this, or I didn't like that. And so it can be really easy if you've got something you're working on in your blank life area to be like, oh, well, screw them. They don't know everything else I do. And you can really devalue the kind of learning and growth you need just by saying, well, I have so much on my plate that, like, it doesn't matter. I'm doing my best. That's not the kind of mentality we want if we want to be taking over the world. We want to always be optimizing. We always want to be executing and getting better and being the best we can. And so learning to deal with criticism is a really, really crucial skill set. And I like this. If there's truth or merit to it, learn from it. Otherwise, just throw it aside. And that happens a lot because you'll begin to tell, okay, what is actually valuable feedback? What can I learn from? And who's in a bad mood and just wants to throw shade my way? And I feel like the only way you can sometimes learn to decipher this is just by getting a crap ton of criticism. You ever want to get criticized a lot? Launch a nonprofit for women. You'll really piss people off. Kind of tying into social media, you really need to give yourself a break. And this is a big part of balance. And so a couple years ago, I was, still fairly young into managing my work-life blank balance. And I had this idea that if I wasn't going all the time, that I was wasting time and I was wasting my life. So if it was like a Sunday morning and I had some free time, I had to be working, or I had to be writing documentation for my nonprofit, or I had to be working on this code implementation that I wanted to get done. And I was having a talk with a female mentor of mine, and she built this amazing company and sold it off a couple years ago, was telling me she had finally bought her first pair of Jimmy Choos. And I'm a shoe girl, so that's my goal is like, oh yeah, I want to be able to afford Jimmy Choos on the fly someday, so that's a big deal. But we were talking about Candy Crush of all things. And she was talking about how much she liked to play it. And I was like, oh, I love playing it too, but I feel really bad about myself. Like, I should be doing something more productive. Like, I'm wasting my own time. And she's like, no. Hold the phone. You work all the damn time. You work your ass off. It is okay to sit there and play Candy Crush on a Thursday night and just give yourself a chance to relax. Give yourself a break. And we really need this. We can't be going all the damn time. I mean, we see the studies that developers are really only productive maybe a max of 6 hours a day writing code. And we need to take breaks. We need to reset our bodies. On that note, let's talk about this self-care, hashtag self-care we keep hearing about. I really like this article, and there's a really good quote in that. And that is, true self-care is not salt baths and chocolate cake. It is making the choice to build a life that you don't need to regularly escape from. And I really feel like this is self-care, and this plays so much into our work-life blank balance, is we need to create a sustainable life. We can't be going all the time, and we can't constantly be forcing ourselves to the edge of burnout, because that's not productive and that's not sustainable. So when we work on automating and prioritizing and processing everything in our life, we need to be building something sustainable, something that works for us, that maximizes our productivity without us crying ourselves to sleep at night, because that's definitely not what we want. A key part of this can be identifying and minimizing stressors. For me personal, I am like a type A control freak, and travel stresses me the fuck out. So I just show up at the airport early. Like, yeah, I might lose an hour of time that I could be doing something else, but the stress lifting that I get just from being at the airport on time and not having to like freak out about making it through to the gate on time is huge. And so that's something small that I can do for myself that just minimizes the amount of stress that goes in. And so if you can look at your life and think, okay, what's pulling my energy? What's this drama source in my life? And how can I figure that out? And how can I minimize it as much as possible? There's some things you're not going to be able to handle. Like, you might be at a job and the sales team like goes off the rails all the time, and they're promising these features, and you're like, that wasn't on the fucking map. And so there are some things that you're not going to be able to avoid. But for everything that you can identify and minimize, do that as much as possible. This is a little bit like automation, but a little more a little more thoughtful in the way we plan our lives. And that's using tools and processes and figuring out which tools and processes work for us. Hacking your work-life balance is a process. It's not like you're going to walk out of this talk today and be like, I'm hacked, I'm going to take over the world. No, you're going to be aware of what's going on and understand that this is a process and constantly optimizing your life and figuring things out, especially as life changes, because we are not stagnant beings, right? We live in a changing world around us. We need to adapt with it. So it's a process, and a process you need to be implementing in your life all the time. So I've mentioned Trello before. Trello is a tracking system, but this is one of the best processes I have. Trello for everything. But the important thing is to figure out a tool that works for you. I have a shitty memory, which is why I rely so heavily on tracking tools. And so figuring out what your deficiencies are as a person and figuring out how to use technology and tools, because we are kind of in a great state where we can have all these different tools available for our disposal, that's really important because for all the areas that you're deficient in, you can rely on technology to help you out there. Calendar hacks. Calendars pull a lot of time and focus, I feel. So for me, if it exists, it is on my calendar, and I live and die by my calendar. So if you try and get a hold, or you try to meet with me and it's not on my calendar, I'm not going to remember it, and it's not going to be there. So if it exists, put it on your calendar. Physically block out work hours for yourself, and this is especially helpful when you're hacking your work-life blank balance, right? It's like, let's say I'm doing my day job 9 to 5. I've got my hour blocked out at 2 p.m. for the gym. Like, that is untouchable. It is on my calendar. It's happening, coming hell or high water. And so that can be really important. I block out work hours for my nonprofit. So I have a calendar set up, and I have these certain meeting slots, and that's when I'll do my meeting time, and I can mentally prep and prepare for whatever might go in that, and that's blocked off on my calendar. Sharing calendars between family members is huge because we're just talking a lot about one person, yourself, right? But what happens if you have a family in the mix, or you have a trip coming up and you need to coordinate that with your husband or your wife, or you need to make sure that your kids' activities are in line to figure out whether you can schedule that trip or not. So sharing calendars between family members can kind of take that step out. And I don't have to answer random text messages from my husband anymore when he's like, hey, what are you doing this day? I'm like, you can look at my calendar. And that's one less thing I have to focus on. Using reminders and to-dos is huge. Just if you have those target dates, those urgent items that you know you have to be hitting, using reminders and to-dos on your calendars. This is big for me. I block off weeks around travel. Because of the unpredictability of travel and so many things that can go wrong, there's nothing worse than like having to reschedule a Monday morning meeting because my flight got delayed. But it's also, I need that time to mentally prepare for leaving to travel because I know I'm going to have last-minute errands, or I'm going to be working on my slides or doing some sort of thing. And if I've got all this crap crammed up right on either side of my traveling, it just stresses me out. So one of the things I've learned to know about myself is when I block up those weeks on either side of my travel, I'm a lot less stressed. If there is some sort of emergency, I've got room on my calendar to handle it. But other than that, that's kind of like sacred decompression time for me. I'm a big advocate of Calendly, which I don't know if anybody has heard of, but this saves my life. So when I mentioned earlier our interview process and sending a link, this is coordinated with my Google Calendar, and so I have set kind of different time slots and parameters around when people can book me, and they can book different event types. And if you even click into these, I have locations listed, so they can pick one of the locations, which happen to be close to where I live and work, and so I know I'll be able to get there in a reasonable manner without screwing my life up. But how many times, like, do you go back and forth in an email chain, right, with somebody trying to coordinate a meeting time? This eliminates all that email back and forth, and it's the closest you can get to having a personal secretary, and it has just changed my life, and pretty much everybody on my team uses this now because it's such a time saver. If whatever you're working on, you can't always find the motivation for, get an accountability buddy. Maybe you don't have a friend who has shared interests. They don't want to spend time blogging or working on talks together or working out at the gym with you. You can actually create your own accountability buddy in Slack using an if this then that recipe, which is actually linked right there. So if you're the kind of person who needs reminders to focus on and keep working on the things that you want to be hacking in your blank balance, this can be a really great tool. Email hacks. Snooze feature by Inbox saves my life. I can, again, snooze an email until I know I'm mentally prepared to deal with it. So anytime I can take a notification that's going to pull my focus and put it off until I can actually give it the time it deserves is huge. Mixmax is the automation tool I use for all my processing. This includes templates that actually have name automation, so they'll just drop in the name. So I click a button, send that template off, and that handles our entire interview process. Boomerang is a different one. This is more specifically for Gmail. email if you are not an inbox user. And Enroll Me is just a basic tool to declutter your inbox, because I feel like we just get hammered all the time by newsletters and everything. And oh my God, since I got married, all of a sudden I'm subscribed to all these different home websites, and I'm like, you guys sold my information, didn't you? So Enroll Me can be a really good tool to help unclutter your inbox. My personal email hacks are, half of email is getting a response from other people, right? And the best way to get a response is make sure that you're always concluding your email with a call to action and a deadline. Hey, give me this response by end of day, Central Standard Time, whatever works for you. But that's one of the best ways you can get a response. If you want to make sure that the information you're communicating to people is going to be retained by them, format your dates in a way that's easy to remember. And if you give them the day of the week as well as the time, it's easier for them to mentally remember, oh, what do I have going on next Thursday? Oh, look at the date. And it's just an easier way to link and make it good on their memory, and then you don't have as much drama being like, hey, we had this meeting, where are you? Make your emails easy to read, and this is using lists and calling out important information, using line breaks, because we want to be good communicators, and that's how we're going to be more efficient. Is by making sure that we're delivering the kind of thing that's going to get us the response back that we want. And there's nothing I hate more than just getting this email of word vomit for 2 pages that I have to reread 6 times to decipher a meaning. So definitely prioritize the way you are writing your emails. This is the time where I harp about meal prep, because this is probably the biggest process time saver that I have implemented in my life in the last year. It really does save time. It removes the decision-making need and willpower. So if you're the person who struggles with making healthy nutritional choices, if you're meal prepping, you really don't have a choice but to go to the fridge and eat what you've already prepared. So it can be a really good way to prioritize your nutrition. Good money saver, not as much of a problem for some of us in this industry, but easy for portion control. And this is something, especially in America, that a lot of people struggle with, because we eat these big portions and we're like, why am I overweight? So this is really good for prepping ahead portion control that you don't have to worry about. Better nutrition, and easy calorie tracking if that's your thing. Tons of resources about why you should be planning your meals. So if you ever do want to get started, my obsession really started with my Instant Pot. Has anybody heard of? It's an electric pressure cooker, and it's my favorite thing in the damn universe. And my friend was like, you have to get one. And I'm like, I don't get it. I don't understand what's happening. But then I got it, and we are a cult. It's the cult of the Instant Pot. You can't know how amazing the cult is until you buy an Instant Pot. But I am able to meal prep 4 meals a day, 5 days a week, in about 6 hours with my Instant Pot. All very nutritionally balanced. It's all according to my macros, which are your fat, protein, and carb balance. And so I can really prioritize whatever my body needs, work it into my meal prep, and that's something less I have to worry about. If you use MyFitnessPal for calorie tracking, you can actually just dump your recipes into MyFitnessPal, and it's going to handle all your calories, so you literally just press one button instead of having to go through and select and go through each ingredient. But when you do recipe matching, make sure, because some jackass in MyFitnessPal said garlic powder has 1,200 calories, and it gets me every time, and it's really annoying. But that can be a really helpful tool. Freeze meals for when you know you won't have time to meal prep, and especially that's for me traveling. So I'm going to be on a flight back home on Sunday, and Sunday is my normal meal prep day. And so I enjoy what are called EFBs, Emergency Freezer Burritos. You can customize them to whatever you like, but then you wrap them up in aluminum foil, put them in the freezer. We have a drop freezer in our basement, and I'll make 72 in a batch at a time. And you just pop them out, put them in the microwave, wrapped in a paper towel for a minute, and you've got a pretty nutritious meal that you can have on the go when you didn't have time to meal prep. Also, subscribe to Reddit Meal Prep Sunday. Great community, all about meal prepping and recipes, and a lot of fun ideas. So let's talk about errand hacks, because a lot of the things that we have to do are running around, and we don't necessarily want to be pulling our focus from what we're doing. So avoiding busy times and running errands when we know that stores are going to be populated by people who are normally doing the shopping. So one of those key times can actually be when parents are picking up their kids from school. And this is a hack tip from my mother that I adore, and it rings true all the time, is I always go and do my grocery shopping when I know the parents are going to be at school picking up their kids, and I'm right through the line, and it's amazing. Train your brain to go into focus mode, and this is really important for when we're trying to create our process. And this can be hard to do because you need to make sure that you're in the right mental space for executing on what you want to execute on. And so music is one of the really great ways to do that. This is actually from a video game soundtrack, and they've done research that looks at the music that video games do, and they're really good for productivity. And if you think about that, right, like if you're playing a video game, you're really focusing on the activity at hand and what you're doing, and they've created music and soundtracks around that, so that's really interesting. So if you can figure out a soundtrack that you like and start to train and automate your brain, you can get into focus mode way faster just by creating that process. Remove distractions, and this is really hard for us being addicted to the internet, but I do want to share one of my favorite ones, which is momentum. I'm really bad at opening and getting on Twitter, and so now when I open my browser, I see a screen like this, and it's pretty and it's aesthetic, and it might have a couple reminders for me, but it somehow just like checks my brain to be like, hey bitch, you shouldn't be working on this, you need to be focusing on this thing, and so it helps me eliminate my distractions. Physically write down the things that are distracting you, and this is huge for me because I can get stressed out when I have too many things going on. But somehow the physical act of just writing down what you have going on and what you need to accomplish that week somehow just like takes all the stress and puts it on a piece of paper where you can see it. And it's this delightful tactile experience that you can use to kind of help chill everything out. And keeping a clean environment, if that is important to you, can really help your focus mode. My desk is like a complete dumpster fire in my office right now, and I can't focus in there. But luckily, the weather's been really nice back home, and so I can work outside on my deck, which is nice and clean and uncluttered, and I've got plants everywhere, and that's really good for my focus mode. And finally, I want to talk about recompensating, and I'm going to try and speed talk and wrap this up really fast because this is a lot of content. But this is all about helping your body recover, because if we're pushing and going all the time, it's not a healthy way to live, and it's not sustainable. So the first thing I really harp on is getting yourself a hobby. And this is something that exists only to bring you joy. It's not something that you feel pressure to improve on. It's just something that makes you happy. And so getting yourself a hobby and having something that you can use like as a distressing element can be really, really big. Have guilty pleasures. And don't feel guilty about them. This is Corinne from a couple seasons ago, The Bachelor, one of my favorite villains of all time. And it's such a trashy TV show, but it's like this one happy thing that I look forward to. Like Monday nights, like I get together with my friend Christy, and it's our thing, and we watch The Bachelor, and it's just like no matter what a dumpster fire my week has been, I have this 2 hours of like escape from reality, escape from my world that just really helps reset me. And it's really interesting, my mood difference when The Bachelor is on air versus when it's off season, because it's like taking away my thing to look forward to, and it's just interesting. And so I actually have to find like filler things or do yoga or something, because for some reason that just spins my world out of existence. But don't feel guilty about it. We need to have something to distract ourselves from and to kind of chill out with. Plan things you look forward to. A couple girlfriends and I went to RuPaul's DragCon in LA, and it was such an amazing trip, but I spend so much of my life like working or speaking at conferences or doing all these things that I forget to do things that are just for fun, like to go and hang out and put on a wig and hang out with drag queens and drink cocktails. So plan things that you look forward to, whether it's a vacation or whether it's just some sort of social outing. Along those notes, schedule your social life. And I feel like this is really hard for us as adults to prioritize these kind of relationships, but they're really, really important. And so I kind of have reminders for myself that every month, like my couple girlfriends, I schedule one-on-one cocktails with them. I'm an introvert, and so the way I really enjoy talking to people is these one-on-one conversations where they can be really meaningful. If you're an extrovert, it would probably be better for you to plan big parties or do rec sports or do group outings, but make sure you're prioritizing your social life and spending time with people just for the sake of joy and being with others. Take a birthday off. I had a really shitty fucking birthday last year. It was awful. It was terrible. And I feel like, we have this sense of responsibility. Like, I'm a grown-ass adult. Like, my birthday doesn't matter. But celebrate yourself. Take a little bit of time just to realize I'm an awesome human being. And it's okay to take my birthday off and eat cake and do whatever you want. I actually had a Lisa Frank birthday party last year, which I don't know if there's anybody in my age range in this room, any females in my age range in this room, but Lisa Frank was the rainbows and the animals and the unicorns, and it was all the rage. So These are just our beginning steps, right, to start hacking our work-life balance so we can spend more time and take over the world. So in a quick recap, we talked about prioritizing, we talked about automating, we talked about balancing, finding tools and processes, and recompensating. And so these are kind of all the things to really start to hack your work-life blank balance and make you the most efficient and most effective that you can be, because that's really how you're going to be successful at taking over the world. This is what we want. We want happy work-life blank balance with stars and cascading things. If you have any questions, we've got 2 minutes. Otherwise, these slides are available on GitHub here, so feel free to take a photo of that. Any questions? I've got like bright lights over here. I don't see any hands. Oh, yes. How to say no to things you're passionate about? Maybe make a flow chart where you're like, do I like this more? Do I like this more? But it is important because you want to dedicate your whole self and make sure you give it your best. And so you might just have to make hard decisions and figure out what are you more passionate about? What is more important? But that can change in a week, in a month. Like you can toggle things. Other questions? Everybody's got a serious case of the hanger like I do? All right, have a lovely rest of the day, you wonderful people.